Thank you for tuning in to watch or to listen to this message today. Wherever you are, at home, in your car, on your computer, on your phone, we're just excited that you're spending time with us. We are on a mission here at CRB to lead people to know and love Jesus. And so if you call this place your home, I encourage you to visit our Give page on our website, where you can find a few easy ways to faithfully support God's work here at the church, financially, through online giving. At CRB, we believe that love will save the world, and the best place to do that is in the local church. So if you live in San Diego or if you're visiting the area, we just want to invite you to come join us on a weekend, come hang out with us, and be a part of the family here. Enjoy the message.
I mean, every day Santa's sleigh pulls into my neighborhood disguised as an Amazon truck. But I don't think Santa's sleigh ever moved as quickly as Amazon Prime. It's like whoosh, and the presents are here. It's Christmas, there's no doubt about that. But do you know that first Christmas it was not filled with shopping malls and shopping carts and long lines and internet purchases. According to the scripture, that first Christmas was filled with trouble, with delayed promises, unmet expectations, and heartbreaking disappointments, which is why today I want to ask you a question. Whether you're celebrating Christmas this year or whether you're frustrated at Christmas this year, here's my question. Can God trust you with disappointment? That's huge. Can God trust you with disappointment at Christmas? Because at Christmas it seems that when troubles happen, when disappointment happens, we don't understand. Our tendency is to want to cancel Christmas, isn't it? It's to want to take a rain check. It's to want to take a pass, because we tend to believe that disappointment disqualifies us from, quote, the happiest time of the year. When we're boxed in by disappointment, our tendency is to want to cancel Christmas. But I think most of us have learned by now not to trust the good news packaging on the gifts under the tree. No matter how big the box is or how bright the bow or how shiny the wrapping, Christmas gifts, they can be deceptive, can't they? I mean, this may not be that Xbox 360 with Kinect that you asked for. And this is probably not that huge 3D, LED, LCD big screen TV that you've been drooling over. And this may not be that Apple iPad Pro that you asked for. Mind you, I've always not been such a cynic, but recently I'm still recovering from a traumatic Christmas disappointment. 3 weeks ago, I'm leaving for work, and Candace says, today I'm going to put up the Christmas tree. Now, our Christmas tree happens to be stored outside in a shed in a sealed container. Okay, so I come home from work, the tree isn't up, but Candace greets me at the front door with eyes big as plates, and she says, I saw something move in the Christmas box. I'm like, yeah, right, sweetheart, you're dreaming, you're seeing things. It's probably nothing, but just in case, I grabbed my shotgun. No, I didn't. I did grab a shovel, and I walked outside expecting absolutely nothing, and I'm poking at the Christmas box when suddenly this huge rat, I know, this huge rat sticks his head up through my Christmas tree, sticks his tongue out at me. I yell, I jump on a chair because I hate rats. Your pastor is scared of rats. And so I did what any red-blooded American male would do. I yelled for my wife. So Candace comes, she jumps on a chair, she's holding a broom, I'm holding a shovel. And she looks at me and says, do something. I said, why me? She said, because you're the man. Friends, I have never wanted to be a woman as much. So as the man, I got down off the chair I took my shovel, I started hacking that Christmas box like I was chopping down a tree. And suddenly, the rat jumps out. He runs across my lawn and he jumps into my swimming pool. No kidding, he's doing the backstroke like Michael Phelps. I run around to the far side of the pool. When he gets close, I take a swing and I miss. He swims down under the water. Very impressive. Swimming under the water when suddenly he bolts to the surface, and I swear he looked me directly in the eye and he begins to swim towards me at full speed. Now, I don't have time to call the prayer chain. I don't have time to call 911 or quote Psalm 91. I have only time to whisper, Jesus, help. And so I take a mighty swing, and the Lord called him home. And I really don't know when my wife has ever been prouder of me than in that moment. I reclaimed my manhood, which was on the bubble. So my point is, heck, I don't know what my point is. I don't even know where I am. I'm still in therapy over this whole incident. Let me take a shot at it. The point is disappointment can be like a rat in your Christmas tree. Because disappointment can ruin our Christmas. You know, if this Christmas, if you can't honestly say, you know, it's just what I always wanted, then chances are you're feeling that maybe Christmas isn't for me this year. But friends, where did that idea come from? Where did it come from? Because that first Christmas, disappointment is in the opening line of the Christmas story. That first Christmas, disappointment, it was a box under every single Christmas tree. Which means if you're stepping into this Christmas and you're feeling boxed in by disappointment, if there's a rat in your Christmas tree, or if you got a bad medical report from the doctor, or if someone broke your heart, I mean, that's hard anytime, but at Christmas, or if you lost your job, if you're struggling to make ends meet, or if the semester didn't end well, if you're feeling boxed in by disappointment this Christmas, listen, the message of the Christmas story is that disappointment is ingredient number one for a Christmas miracle. Because I tell you what, our God can pull Christmas out of a box called disappointment. And the way he does that, it was something called hope. It's called hope. Let me show you what I mean. If you have your Bibles open to Luke chapter 1, or you can follow along on the big screen. Now Luke does not start the Christmas story with good news. Okay, he doesn't start by saying, once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away. No, he starts the Christmas story with disappointing news. The story starts in chapter 1, verse 5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea. Now that is disappointing news. There was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Now there are three names in this verse, but in the first century, there was only one name that had significance. So only one name mattered. Only one name here caused people to stand up and tremble, and that was the name King Herod of Judea. The year's about 4 BC. King Herod was actually a foreign king. He was forced on the children of Israel by Emperor Augustus, the emperor of Rome. And even though Herod had Jewish ancestry, he lived like a pagan and he ruled like a Roman. By all accounts, King Herod was a monster. In fact, Hollywood pictured him like this. Talk about a rat in your Christmas tree. But I tend to picture Herod like this, because he was the Darth Vader of the first century. Even though he had Jedi Knight ancestry, he chose to go over to the dark side. He was a brutal tyrant. He taxed God's people into poverty in order to finance his lavish construction projects. He was so mentally unstable and emotionally insecure that he had 6 of his 10 wives executed for jealousy, and his sons. Whenever any of his sons seemed to have an aspiration for the throne, he'd have them executed. So his sons were like, Dad, really, I don't want to be king. It's not good to be king. He was quick to imprison. He was quick to execute. In fact, in chapter 9 of Isaiah, when the prophet said that a people living in the land of darkness have seen a great light, that land of darkness, it was created by King Herod. He is the one who ordered the slaughter of the innocents. When he heard that a king was born in Bethlehem, he ordered that all baby boys, think about this, all baby boys under the age of 2 be murdered. He was the architect of a first century Aleppo. He was a madman. He was a monster. His name caused people to tremble. And he was one of the reasons why that first Christmas was so disappointing. Okay, in comparison, Zechariah and Elizabeth, first century, they were virtually nobodies. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find any 2 other people who were more overshadowed and upstaged by all the other players in the Christmas story. In fact, you ask someone to read you the Christmas story, they will skip over Luke chapter 1 and they'll start in Luke chapter 2, which is why we know Mary and we know Joseph and we know the angels, we know the shepherds, and we know the little 8-pound baby Jesus. But it's like, Zach who? Liz, what's her name? You know, my mother teaches a Bible study on Tuesday mornings at Rancho Bernardo. And her Bible study is comprised of over 50 octogenarians. And some of these folks, they've loved God and His Word for over 50 years. But 3 weeks ago when she asked them, tell me, who is Zechariah and Elizabeth in the Christmas story? Silence. Just silence. And then she asked them, can you tell me what was the name of their firstborn son during Christmas? And again, silence until someone shouted out, Jesus! Because when you're in a Bible study, the answer is always Jesus. Like the Sunday school teacher who one Sunday morning asked her children, kids, tell me, what's gray, has a big bushy tail, climbs trees, and eats nuts? Little kid jumped up and said, well, it sounds like a squirrel, but I'm going to say Jesus. Because the answer is always Jesus. We know Mary, we know Joseph, but who is Zechariah and Elizabeth? And the answer is, they're the parents of... Yeah, that's good, because that'll be on heaven's entrance exam. John the Baptist, huge name. He was the one, the prophet Isaiah said, would prepare the way, prepare the world, prepare your heart and mind for the arrival of God on Christmas Day. Okay. So maybe a small takeaway here is that if God chose to bless a couple of nobodies, like Zechariah and Elizabeth that first Christmas, and maybe, just maybe, He's preparing to bless a couple of somebodies like you and like me this Christmas. Okay, because Zechariah wasn't exactly a raving success as a priest. He didn't have a big name. He wasn't a Billy Graham. He wasn't a Bill Hybels. He wasn't a Rick Warren. He didn't pastor a mega church. The scriptures say that he ministered on the backside of like Ramona. Okay, so he was like the Andy Griffith of the priesthood. And so you know that he was looked down upon. He was dismissed and he was dissed by his more sophisticated brothers who pastored in the big city of Jerusalem. Zechariah, he lived in the shadow of people who were smarter, stronger, quote, sexier, and more successful than him. So if this Christmas, if you're feeling upstaged, if you're feeling overshadowed by an older brother, an older sister, or a friend, or a coworker, chances are you know the kind of disappointment that Zechariah personally experienced that first Christmas. And Elizabeth, verse 6, both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. So they were rule keepers. They kept the Torah. They kept the law. But, there's a big but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Okay, so even though they were card-carrying AARP members, they carried this huge disappointment that first Christmas. They couldn't have children. And while you may not think that's a big deal, in the first century, it was not just a stigma, but it was a sign of God's punishment. So when Zechariah and Elizabeth, when they walked through their village, people would look at them and say, oh, they may look godly, they may look religious on the outside, but you know they did something bad. Because God's punished them with no children. Is there anything worse than that? Some of you know what it is to not only experience the loss of something that you can't afford to lose, but then there are people around you who actually say you deserve it. And you brought it on yourself. It's horrible. In the first century, an Israeli couple, newlywed couple, their biggest dream was a baby. And not necessarily so with everyone today, not with my son. My son doesn't want a baby right now, he wants a puppy. And so I am proud to announce that in March of next year, I'm going to be the proud grandpappy of a new grandpuppy, a yellow lab. And I want him to be named Boone. Don't you like that, Boone? It's so random, isn't it? Yeah. Anyhow. You can pray about that. Back to the story. So the theological hope of every young Jewish husband, it was to have a large family because they believed my next son could be the Messiah. My next son could be the heaven-sent deliverer of Israel. So you can understand the pain in verse 7 here. And some of you know personally how many tears, how many unanswered prayers, how many unanswered questions are in between these lines that Elizabeth could not conceive. And for you and I, it may not be a baby, it might be. But you and I know what it is to long for something with all our hearts. For that healing, for that relationship, to save that marriage, to finish that degree, to do that deal, or to win that job. And when that doesn't happen, you know the disappointment that turns to sadness, that turns to despair. And before you know it, you're taking your hopes, you're putting them in a suitcase, and you're locking them up in a closet. Zechariah and Elizabeth, that first Christmas, felt boxed in by disappointment. They were overshadowed by people who were smarter and stronger and more successful than they were, and they were overwhelmed by expectations they couldn't meet, and they were over their head with problems they could not solve. Merry Christmas? I don't think so. But then Zechariah finds himself in the right place at the right time, and he catches a break. Check this out, verse 8. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot. This is an early form of Powerball. Okay, he won the lottery. It was according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Now, friends, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. This is the day when Zechariah gets the corner office. Okay, he's selected as teacher of the year. He's voted employee of the year. This is a big deal when a priest is selected by lottery for going into the temple and offering up incense to God. Okay, in the temple. In the temple. Hello, temple. We got no temple? Okay, well, in the middle of the temple, there it is a large building called the Holy of Holies. And once a year, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies and they would seek forgiveness for the sins that God's people had committed all year. It's a day called Yom Kippur. Well, just outside the Holy of Holies is the second most holy place, and this is where a priest every day would burn incense. And the incense symbolized the prayers of all God's people. This is a big deal. There were 18,000 priests in Jerusalem. A priest could go their whole life and never be selected, never have their number come up for this honor. Okay? So this is my question. Do you think that Zechariah just happened to be in the right place at the right time for something lucky to happen, or because someone great and gracious loved him enough to do for him what he could not do for himself? Was it luck or was it the Lord? Friends, I believe that every good break, every great opportunity, every good thing that's ever happened to you is not because you just happened to be at the right place at the right time for something lucky to happen, but because someone great and gracious loved you enough, did for you what you could not do for yourself. When you believe it's the Lord and not luck, you open yourself up to hope that comes from a God who can bring good out of bad. You know, I don't think I've ever told you this, but on the day when I left home, my home, for the very first time, to travel 3,000 miles cross country to my first year of college, that season of my life, I was so messed up on that day. I was boxed in by disappointment. My mom and dad were getting a divorce. My dad was in the hospital that day about to lose an eye. My mom was in the process of losing her home. That day, I was just coming off a bout of scarlet fever, and everything I owned was packed away in the back seat of my car. The day I'm to leave home for the very first time, no one's home. My home is empty. My dad isn't there, my mom isn't there, my two sisters weren't there, my brother wasn't there. There was no one to see me off, no one to wish me well, no one to say goodbye. Okay? When suddenly, around the corner, comes the most beautiful young lady on a 10-speed bike. Her name is Candy Karstens. Now, I don't know her. We have never met. She's coming over to see my sister. And that day, she sees me off. She wishes me well. She says goodbye, which is why several years later, when she realized that she couldn't live without me, what? I married her. At least that's the way I remember it. Here's my question. Do you think that the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life on this side of heaven happened because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time for something lucky to happen, or because someone great and gracious loved me enough to do for me what I could not do for myself? It's because I believe it wasn't luck, it was the Lord, that today I have hope in my life. And another takeaway is that if God could do this for Zechariah that first Christmas, then he can do that for you this Christmas. Now, let me switch gears. Imagine for a moment how nervous Zechariah must have been as he climbed up those stairs to the altar. Imagine how intimidating he must have felt as he walked past those huge bronze pillars. He comes to the Holy of Holies, and he swings that censer to the left, and then he swings it to the right. And as that smoke, that incense begins to rise up, in a moment he goes from bitter disappointment to divine appointment. Because in the smoke suddenly appears this massive archangel named Gabriel, the most powerful warrior angel in heaven. Verse 11. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled. Duh! I think the Hebrew says he had to change his loincloth. He was gripped with fear. And not just because the angel was awesome, although he was, but because when you encounter someone in a place where you're expecting no one, it's scary. A couple weeks back, 2 a.m., I'm sound asleep, and Candace gets up to go get a drink of water. And unbeknownst to me, I get up a minute later and I'm stumbling down the hallway, half asleep in the dark towards the bathroom, when suddenly Candace comes around the corner. No wonder I have heart problems. And it's not because she's frightening without makeup, because she's not. And it's not because I'm a fraidy cat. It's because we encountered someone in a place where we expected no one. Let's keep reading. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Verse 13, but the angel said to him, don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. Man, imagine that news. He will be a joy and a delight to you. Many will rejoice because of his birth. He will be great in the sight of the Lord. He's never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. I mean, that's like the Lord telling you that your son will lead the San Diego Chargers to their first Super Bowl. Great news. And John will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, and he will make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Boom, God pulls Christmas out of a box called disappointment. The angel tells Zechariah that everything his heart has longed for, that he hasn't received over the last 60 years, that has boxed him in with disappointment, that has broken his heart, will now be fulfilled. Why? Because your prayer has been heard. What? Because your prayer has been heard. What? Because your prayer has been heard. Friends, that's the key that unlocks the door. That's what allowed God to bust hope into their disappointment. You know, the one person that I can relate to in the Christmas story more than anyone else, it's not Joseph. I am not a carpenter. These hands break more things than they build. And I can't relate to Mary. I've never been pregnant. I don't ever want to be pregnant. Even though Candace said when she was pregnant, there's this incredible bond that develops between a mother and the unborn child. Still, I just don't ever want to have a live human being inside my body, pulling and poking and moving and kicking. You know, even though when she was pregnant, I said, we're pregnant, we're having a baby, we're having a baby. When the truth is, we did not have the baby. She had the baby, and I'm just good with that. Can't relate. And as far as angels go, I've really never been accused of being an angel. No one ever said, oh, Pastor Harry, he's such an angel. And Jesus, not. Can't relate, but I can relate to Zechariah. Can't you? I can relate to a guy who's experienced so much disappointment that on Christmas, he's just going through the motions with God. I believe there was a time in Zechariah's life when he was a little boy. I believe there was a time in your life when you were little. Maybe it was at vacation Bible school or Sunday school or maybe a junior high church camp. But I believe there was a time in your life when you were little, when you said, God, I believe in you. God, I like you. God, I want you in my heart. God, I want a relationship with you. When you were little, your faith was strong and your passion for God was high. Then life happened. Disappointments happened and you started to drift. You started to wander away from God. Maybe it was a bad church experience. Or maybe your family moved like Zechariah's to Ramona and you disconnected with the church, drifted from God. Or maybe you went to college and discovered believing in God doesn't make intellectual sense anymore. Or maybe a tragedy happened. Maybe you lost something you couldn't afford to lose, like a job or a relationship or a marriage or your health or your reputation or a friend. And you prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and God didn't answer. And so you said, God, if you're not interested in my life any more than that, then I'm not interested in you. And so you drifted and you wandered. Maybe the Bible just stopped making sense to you. I don't know what your story is, but I know this. If your story is anything like Zechariah's, then I can understand why this Christmas, you're just going through the motions with God. But the brilliance of Zechariah is that first Christmas, he decided to re-engage with God like when he was little. So he prayed an honest prayer. A prayer probably like, God, you haven't heard from me for a long, long time. Why did he throw up an honest prayer? Because there was still a light in him. The light of Christ was still in him. It may have been a little light, a little spark, a little flame, but that's a light disappointment can never put out. How do I know that? Because every time you see a children's play at Christmas, every time you sing Silent Night, Holy Night, every time you walk through Target and hear Amy Grant singing Joy to the World, or every time you walk through your neighborhood on a cold December night and you see your neighbor's nativity scene and you look at that baby in the manger, your heart whispers again that God is still here, that God still loves you, God is still with you, and that God still cares for you. Listen, what Zechariah teaches us is that just because you're visited by an angel on Christmas doesn't mean you're going to understand it all. What he teaches us is just because you know God is with you on Christmas doesn't mean you won't have doubt. Just because you know that God loves you on Christmas doesn't mean you won't experience disappointment. But the beauty of Zechariah is that he decides that first Christmas that, man, if God chose me when my life isn't perfect, then I can choose God when my life isn't perfect. And in the midst of his disappointment, he chooses to re-engage with God that first Christmas. Prays an honest prayer, and boom, hope. Hope is born inside a box called disappointment. Friend, if you're feeling boxed in by disappointment this Christmas, my invitation to you, re-engage with God. Re-engage with him like you did when you were little. And maybe that means praying an honest prayer. Maybe it's praying, God, you haven't heard from me for a long, long time. Re-engage with God. Make a decision to be in church on a regular basis. Re-engage with God. Forgive someone. Let them off the hook, and you'll discover you've been let off the hook. For some of you who've been around for a while, re-engage with God by grabbing an armload of those Christmas cards, handing them out to a boatload of family and friends, and getting them here on Christmas Eve. Re-engage with God by doing something crazy, something radical with that Christmas offering, because Zechariah teaches us that God hears, and God sees, and God cares, and he will respond by pulling Christmas out of your box called disappointment. And he'll do that by giving you hope. He did that for Zechariah the first Christmas. He can do it for you and I this Christmas. Okay? I'm done. Let me pray. Father in heaven, a lot of us, maybe all of us, are stepping into this Christmas with more disappointment in our life than we hoped we would have. And I want to thank you that on Christmas, you didn't send something, you sent someone. You sent Jesus, and in him, there's hope. And so I pray that everyone in their own way would just re-engage with you this Christmas.